endorse the Obama administration's regulatory reform proposal. I'm curious to know if you arrived at this position as a member of the Board of Governors after conducting an independent assessment of the plan, which I hope is the case. Otherwise, it would call into question the so-called independence of the Fed. Could you provide the committee with the data and analysis that you used to make the determination that the Obama plan was optimal approach?
Well, Senator, I actually wouldn't say that the board's position is an endorsement of the administration's plan. I think what you saw in my testimony, the prepared testimony, which reflects the position of the board, is a sense that the administration is moving in the right direction on these key components, that there are obviously lots of details, many of which, by the way, we don't know and didn't know based on the white paper and are only beginning to find out as they send up legislation to you. I think that what about our legislation? You know, they want to send it up, but don't you think we should be preparing our own legislation? Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, all I'm saying is we couldn't figure out in some cases exactly what one of their proposals meant, which is why the testimony is phrased in such a way as to agree with the concept of needing to have every systemically important institution supervised and needing to have a resolution mechanism. As you probably saw, the Fed is certainly not endorsing the proposal of the administration to create the new consumer agency. It's not opposing it either. Let me get into that a little bit. Safety and soundness regulation, very important here. In your testimony, you state there are synergies between the monetary policy and systemic risk regulation. In order to capture these synergies, you argue that the Fed should become a systemic risk regulator, as I understand it. Yesterday, Chairman Bernanke testified that he believed there are synergies between prudential bank regulation and consumer protection. This argues in favor of establishing one consolidated bank regulator. Do you agree with Chairman Bernanke that there are synergies between prudential supervision and consumer protection? And if so, do you believe that the Obama administration's call for a separate consumer protection agency would undermine the safety and soundness regulation that we have? Senator, as I said in my introductory comments, there are multiple ways to organize or to reorganize financial services regulation. Many times you've got competing ideas, each of which has merits and each of which has some demerits. With respect to the consumer protection issue, the administration has made a proposal, which I think a lot of people have some sympathy with, because what it focuses on consumer protection. We say we're going to give one agency the exclusive authority to regulate on consumer matters, and thus they will be 100% devoted to doing that. What we have in the testimony is meant only to suggest that there are some things that would be lost by doing that, as well as some things that would be gained. And what the chairman, I think, was suggesting yesterday is that there is a synergy or interaction between prudential regulation and consumer protection regulation, at least if they're both being done well. That synergy is both in the substance of things, that is, having some sense of what makes an effective consumer protection regulation, because you know the way in which the institutions operate, but also in a practical sense that as you've got one corps of examiners, there's a certain economy of scope in having them looking at the multiple sets of issues within the same organization. So I definitely think there are synergies. There are some benefits that go back and forth. If you take consumer protection away and put it in another agency, you'll probably lose some of those. I guess the administration's position would be, yeah, but you'd gain some things along the way. Chairman Baer, the Obama administration's proposal, as I understand it, would have regulators designate certain firms as systemically important. You alluded to that earlier. These firms would be classified as Tier 1 financial holding companies and would be subject to a separate regulatory regime. If some firms are designated as systemically important, would this signal to market participants that the government will not allow these firms to fail? And if so, how would this worsen our too big to fail problem?
Well, we do have concerns about formally designated certain institutions as a special class. At the same time, we recognize there may be very large interconnected financial entities out there that are not yet subject to federal consolidated supervision. I think almost all of them already are now as a result of the crisis. But some type of formal designation, I think you need to think hard about for just the reasons you expressed. Any recognition of an institution as being systemic, though, should be a stigmatizing designation, not something that is favorable. And this is why we do feel so strongly that a robust resolution mechanism needs for very large financial organizations needs to be combined with any type of new entity to provide supervision or to even recognize that some institutions may be systemic.
Governor, I want to get back on the consumer protection. I've just got a second or two. There's testimony here last week on that this would change the whole model from a classical approach to consumer protection to a behavioral approach. Have you done some work in that area? Have you looked at that closely yet?
Senator, I have to be honest, I'm not altogether sure what that refers to. I can only tell you the way, again, based on what I've learned since I've been at the Fed, the way in which the division there does consumer protection and generates proposals is one that has a fairly important behavioral orientation, up to and including the fact that there's extensive consumer testing done before regulations are presented to the board to make sure, for example, that if what you're trying to do is disclose terms of a consumer contract, that the kind of terms you're disclosing will actually mean something to a consumer and be useful to them. So in that sense, it's not just a top-down, how would the rational person think, but you actually try to determine how real people really do think.
Put a lot of power in the bureaucrats, would it not?
To create a...
No, if we created something like they propose, which I hope we won't, it put a lot of power in the bureaucrats.
It depends, Senator. I mean, obviously it depends on the mandate and the scope. That is obviously to be determined by all of you. I think that people at the Fed would agree strongly with the proposition that there needs to be good, solid consumer protection in the financial services area. Obviously, we also think that should be done in a well-organized fashion with due process for everyone involved.
Thank you.